We've spent some time identifying the four irrational attitudes, the four bad ways to react to reasons, to arguments that were mentioned in the book, or were mentioned by at least Isaac Watts in his book. And to this, Feldman adds one, namely relativism, that everybody is right. And the reason he's identifying this is to try to get you to understand when you're approaching arguments, when you are looking at arguments, you don't want to take these attitudes because they're very bad attitudes and you're not going to be able to learn anything. You're not going to have the right reaction. And he wants to contrast this with what rational thinkers do. People who are smart, who solve problems, develop the skills that we're trying to develop in the course. Well, they have certain abilities. Among them, and these are the things we're going to try to develop in the course of this semester, they're able to distinguish general arguments, reasons, and evidence from other things. They're able to understand and interpret arguments. And they have different attitudes from what those last 4 or 5 guys were thinking about. They have a willingness to examine arguments with open minds. Sometimes in the logic class, I started having people look at arguments and immediately they're jumping up and they want to object. They find something wrong with the argument, which is perfectly okay. But the only thing it's suggested here is if you're going to be rational about things, why don't you just look at it with an open mind? Even if the conclusion of this argument, what it's leading to, is something you don't believe and you find very threatening. But examine it with an open mind. In addition to which, kind of on the flip side, you have to have an ability to change your mind when arguments are called for. Earlier, we were looking at an article written by Charles Krauthammer. Charles Krauthammer was one of the leading thinkers, and who published in the magazine that is sort of the thought, or one of the thought leaders in liberal thinking, the New Republic. Well, he examined the facts. He's come to a different conclusion now. That's not to say that he's right. That's not to say he's wrong. But he had the right attitude to be able to come to the right conclusion. And the other thing another thing you're going to have to be able to do is give up popular and comfortable beliefs when arguments call for it. And this is a real problem. This is why people don't want to open up their minds. It's because sometimes they come to a belief that, the arguments show that this is the belief they should have, and they're just not comfortable changing what they currently believe in. Comes up in a lot of social problems, issues that are discussed over time. What people regard as being right and wrong has changed. There are major issues. If we go back, what's non-controversial to us now, slavery. In the 1860s, it certainly was more controversial, and people came to the belief that they were just wrong in thinking that slavery was okay. So you have to have the right attitude, this attitude. And finally, you can't just say, well, throw your hands up and say, I just can't figure this out. I'm not going to believe anything. Because what's rational to do is to have the attitude that you're going to form beliefs even though you might be wrong. You're going to take the best evidence that you have and follow it where it leads you. And when you're considering new matters, you're going to listen to both sides, or maybe more than 2 sides of an issue. Now, I just want to quickly outline these points that Feldman makes, and I think they're very critical ones, because one of the some of the problems that people have that prevents them from believing things on good reasons and coming to the right conclusions is, and it hits, and that's what we're going to be develop. We're going to try to correct these during the course of the semester. First of all, could be a lack of adequate vocabulary. What does that mean? You know, look at the argument. You think there's something wrong, but you don't exactly know how to even state it. Notice already we have more of a vocabulary. We know there are premises that are reasons, and there are conclusions. That's the point that we're trying to get to. So you might not have even made that distinction carefully, so you didn't have the vocabulary to discuss the issues. We're going to increase our vocabulary in this regard over the course of the semester. Then people sometimes think that they have a desire to be tolerant or open-minded. Now, you can be tolerant and open-minded. You can consider people's opinions and be tolerant of their opinions. That is, you're not going to say, hey, look, either you believe what I do or I'm going to shoot you in the head. I mean, unfortunately, we've seen cases over the last 10 or 15 years where there's a certain amount of intolerance in the world. Nonetheless, it doesn't mean that you shouldn't consider reasons and you shouldn't think things are true and false. You can be tolerant of somebody's opinion even though you think he or she is wrong. You can be tolerant of a person and let them practice their religion even though you think their religious beliefs are absolutely wrong and can be demonstrated to be wrong. Now, another impediment to dealing with arguments rationally is misunderstanding the point of argument analysis. Some people think that the point of argument analysis is, and this goes back to the Krauthammer Kilpatrick commentary, is to be the winner. It's a boxing match. An argument is a boxing match, and you got to be the winner. No, it isn't. The goal of arguments that we're talking about in this class is to be able to get to the right conclusions, to start from certain acceptable premises and get to the right conclusions. It's not to be that you had the correct opinion, the other guy had the wrong opinion, or vice versa. This can set you off in the wrong directions. Something we'll be talking about a little bit more, misconceptions about truth and rationality. And we'll be talking a little more later on during the semester about truth and rationality and what that means. But this gets to one of the issues that it gets to is the relativism. And the relativism also leads you into the next one that Feldman calls the use of arguments stoppers. You're talking to somebody about an issue and they say, yes, well, you're entitled to your opinion, I'm entitled to mine. That's not addressing. If you are asking a question of why a person believes something and he says, well, because I do, it's not appropriate to end the argument there. Maybe you're not in the mood to talk about it. Maybe it's not the right time. But if you're going to be rational about things, you don't shut down a conversation. Now that we have a good idea of what arguments are, how to approach them, what's a good attitude with which to approach looking, examining, evaluating arguments, understanding arguments. Next, we're going to jump into the material and start getting really clear on some of, and maybe addressing the first point up there, our lack of vocabulary, and we're going to be learning a whole bunch of additional vocabulary.